Hi there, my name is Philip Eidson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact.
Hi, my name is Kelly Barner. I'm the head of content and operations at Art of Procurement, and I'm joined today by Yushiro Kato. He is the co-founder and CEO of CADDi. Now, you may have recently caught an AOP introducing live stream that we did with him to learn a little bit more about the company's origin story and his own background. But I still want to kick off today's discussion by going to our trademark Art of Procurement question. So before I do that, Yushiro, hi, and thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. And I already know a little bit about what we're going to learn today, so I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. As I had said, people who joined us for the live stream, either live or on demand, have potentially already heard part of this answer, but it's such a tradition here at Art of Procurement that I want to ask you again. The question is, did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
Okay, I would say both. Both got to know each other. But actually, I was working for McKinsey before starting up this company, CADDi. And I was a leader of procurement practice in manufacturing field, covering US, Japan, Netherlands, and China. So that's when I started to know what is procurement, and I found it really interesting. So that's why I founded my company, focusing on procurement transformation.
Now, you mentioned being in both procurement and also manufacturing at McKinsey. Was it manufacturing that led you to procurement, procurement that led you to manufacturing? How did you end up with that combination of areas of focus?
That's a very interesting question. So when I was before joining McKinsey, I was at university, and I had my own business there, and I wanted to have my own business, or I wanted to restart my own business. So that's and I wanted to focus on bigger issues and deeper issues that are globally common. And so I didn't have any idea on that. So that's why I chose McKinsey to support a lot of customers across the industries. And then I tried to support communication industry, trading industry, investment industry, and manufacturing, and so on. And I spent the first 1 and 2 years on that. And then after that, I found manufacturing and procurement. So manufacturing industry, very fascinating because it's really huge. It's one of the biggest industries in the US and Japan. And then and procurement is actually the biggest component when it comes to manufacturing. It accounts for 60% of the revenue on average. And there are a lot of issues in procurement. So that's why I identified procurement as the kind of a starting point.
Well, if you're looking to fix big problems, like you said, manufacturing is certainly a really good place to go. There's a lot of big opportunities in manufacturing.
Yes.
And pairing up procurement as the solution for that, that's, I think, very inspiring to those of us who have been in the field. I've not worked in manufacturing. I've done retail. I've done logistics. And it's interesting because by industry, there are different things that procurement can bring to bear. I'm looking forward to talking about sort of a direct spend oriented approach within manufacturing. Before we do that, we've talked about big challenges, big opportunities. I know from experience that our listeners love to start with sort of a state of the state. And when we think about global manufacturing, especially some of the disruptions and uncertainty in global supply chains, where would you say we are right now from a certainty, from a planning standpoint? What kind of confidence horizon are companies currently dealing with?
So for most of the procurement people, it's been a really difficult time for the last 2 and 3 years after COVID. So of course, COVID and China's zero COVID policy and Russia's invasion. Because of these factors, first of all, cost increased a lot. Energy costs soared, material costs increased, and transportation costs increased, and also, of course, inflation in the U.S.
Yeah.
So all those combined, total cost of your purchasing increased a lot. That's one thing, and actually more than that. Most of the people in procurement faced difficulty of just getting parts, securing the capacity of parts, especially chips or semiconductor parts. So it's been, but at the same time, I thought, before COVID, procurement was kind of undervalued from management perspective. Of course, it depends on the companies. And now people know that procurement is very important, and procurement is very important in a way that that is important to reduce the cost, but at the same time, in order to increase the revenue, it is very important because without the product or without the parts, you cannot ship your final product to your customers, right?
Yeah.
So it's been tough, but actually the last 2 years, 3 years was kind of a great opportunity for elevating procurement positioning in manufacturing field.
And it's interesting because I think this is cross-industry. We often talk about the fact that procurement and supply chain have been in the limelight for the last few years. Everyone sort of turned to us to say, how can you help us fix this problem or ward off this risk?
Mm-hmm.
But there have also been changes within procurement and supply chain. I mean, the whole risk paradigm changed. I think with so much unprecedented uncertainty, we were able to say there was no way we could have predicted this. And so, you know what? No, we don't have a solution, but no one else does either.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like it opened people's minds to trying new things simply because so many of the old traditional techniques had been taken off of people's desks given what we were dealing with? Has it changed procurement also?
Yeah, so generally, of course, in terms of procurement, most of the people were kind of conservative because, of course, quality is very important. On-time delivery is very important. So it's really difficult for them to switch to suppliers. Of course, there's a risk, right? But actually now it's really difficult to have a good portfolio of suppliers and diversify your portfolio of suppliers. So many procurement people are more eager to look for new suppliers and to have kind of diverse portfolio of your suppliers. So yes, just as kind of people got used to Zoom or online meetings.
Yes.
Procurement people are getting used to finding new suppliers and doing a lot of audits and so on. So it's not of course it's tough, but there's a lot of good things for procurement.
Absolutely. And you mentioned sort of 3 sometimes competing, but core objectives, right? There's always cost, there's always quality, and of course, there's the concern around on-time delivery.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're going to focus on for a little bit is procurement's ability to apply should cost modeling to address all of these things together so that you're not saying, I hit my price point, but the quality is terrible, right? We need to be careful of those trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
And you had shared some interesting information with me in advance of this conversation. So I'm going to bring a couple of these data points in and then get you to maybe elaborate on them a little bit. The first one, and I'll admit this was surprising to me and not necessarily in a good way. Only 28% of procurement professionals know what should cost analysis is.
Mm-hmm.
So just for the sake of making sure everyone gets the most they can out of this conversation, Yushiro, can you start us off with what is should cost analysis?
Okay. Yes. So based on our survey, only 28% people said they know should cost analysis.
Yeah.
So should cost analysis is a very impactful tool to basically reduce the cost. So should cost analysis is kind of a technique in procurement to estimate the cost of the product by breaking it down into details like labor cost, material cost, machinery cost, or it could be depreciation of the machinery cost, overheads and profit and logistics sometimes.
Yeah.
So by breaking it down into details, you will have, you can estimate kind of not very precise, but the cost should be at this level, right, at the supplier side. And then using that estimation, comparing that with the actual cost you are paying for your supplier, there's always a gap between the two. And then that's the starting point of your discussion with your suppliers. So generally speaking, you go to the supplier site and say, hey, this is the estimation that we created, and there's a gap between your price and our estimated cost, right? And then, of course, you should not just squeeze the margin of the suppliers. So compare the breakdown of the cost, and then find a place or area where you probably can improve the breakdown of the cost. So that's what is should cost and how we use should cost in a rough manner.
So we're literally going through a process of figuring out what should the product cost, right? You talked about breaking it down into those elements. That sounds like it would be the kind of thing that would be a regular asset in procurement's toolkit. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that only 28% of the people surveyed said that they were familiar with what it is and how it works?
So actually, should cost analysis is very popular, or I'd say common in automotive industry or mass production industries, because so we have a lot of customers in high mix, low volume industries and mid volume industries. For example, machinery manufacturers or aircraft manufacturers, construction machinery manufacturers. Of course, they are in many high mix, low volume industry. So the number of components they need to deal with, per procurement person is huge, right? Much more than automotive industries or wire appliances or smartphones, because of course, in mass production industry, you need to deal with a small number of parts, but one part costs a lot. So basically, you cannot spend a lot of time on analysis in high mix, low volume industry per part, because you need to handle a lot of parts on a daily basis. So probably that is one of the reasons why not many people know about should cost analysis.
And we have another data point that we can run against that. So as we were saying, about only 28% of procurement professionals are familiar with should cost analysis or modeling, but only 4.6% use it. So even of that small group of people that are familiar with should cost analysis and modeling and presumably understand its benefits, only about a quarter of them are actually using it. What are your thoughts around why that would be?
Yes. So again, it takes a lot of time. So knowing and doing, knowing it and doing it is very different, right? So in terms of execution, it takes a lot of time, and also it needs some expertise on production and material cost and logistics cost. So that's why it's a little harder to. So especially in high mix low volume industry. It's a little harder for them to use should cost analysis and apply should cost analysis as a good tool for cost cutting. But actually, there's some ways to utilize it. So probably today we're going to talk about that.
Absolutely. You've mentioned time a number of times in this conversation. And certainly we've talked about all of the challenges that companies are facing, procurement is facing. No one has spare time, right? I think we can probably just all agree to that. We all have more things to do than the time to do them in.
Yes.
Can you give me a sense of what kind of time we're talking about? So if you think in your mind of, whether it's an automotive example or some type of mass production example, what type of time are we talking about for a procurement team to do a should cost analysis on each of these parts as you're talking about?
Okay. Actually, there's a data that procurement people only spends 10% of their time on strategic actions, including should cost analysis or cost planning or other cost-cutting tools, including VAV, value analysis, value engineering, to design changes. So generally speaking, it totally depends on the parts. So if you want to do should cost analysis for, let's say, this kind of outlet or charger, it doesn't take a lot of time. Probably it's like 2 hours, I'd say. But generally speaking, you need to focus on core parts that you're handling, because generally, there's a parade analysis. 20% of the parts account for 80% of the cost. So you should not focus on the rest 80% or long tail parts. You should focus on the core 20% of the parts you're dealing with. So that's kind of core parts, of course, generally are complex or assemblies. So that in that case, it takes a lot of time to do should cost analysis for one assembly. So generally speaking, for example, at McKinsey, we generally chose like 5 to 10 parts to do should cost analysis, to apply should cost analysis to. And then takes like 1 to 1.5 months doing all the should cost analysis for only for 5, 10 parts. So that's the time frame for experts, I'd say.
So if you're someone that's just coming to this idea of should cost analysis, I love the fact that the Pareto principle comes into this. That's something we all know, right? And hopefully there's some overlap between the 80% of people that are trying to do a better job managing costs and the 28% of people that know what should cost analysis is, right? Going for a little bit of overlap there. But you also mentioned some other cost reduction strategies. So I'm assuming that building the should cost model is not sort of the end goal in and of itself. It's building a model, doing analysis that helps you understand, okay, then what do I do to reduce the cost of this item without affecting quality and delivery timing? Can you give me maybe just a couple of examples? I'm glad to stay with the outlet. I think it's great to have something concrete. Can you give me a couple of examples how step one, doing a should cost analysis, can feed into some of the cost reduction practices that perhaps more procurement professionals are both familiar with and also using?
Okay, so there are a lot of approaches to reduce the cost, of course. So actually, should cost analysis is categorized as technical levers. So there are technical levers and commercial levers, generally speaking. And in commercial levers, of course, supplier negotiation strategy, that's called SNS. This is, of course, one of the most powerful tools. But actually, I would say most of the people are, using this tool, but in a little different way. So they kind of, so this is our target cost, or I want to reduce the cost of the parts by 5% or 10% without any reason, right? So combining, and also another example is, of course, finding new suppliers or creating a competitive landscape or creating a supplier portfolio to have suppliers compete with each other, right? That's kind of commercial levers. Generally speaking, it's to squeeze the margins of the suppliers, but that's not enough. So I recommend to include some of the technical levers, including should cost analysis, or again VAVE, which is very common. So basically, if you change designs, or if you choose materials with reasonable price or more, I would say cheaper materials, then suppliers don't have to, necessarily have to reduce their margins. Their material costs will be reduced. Their production costs will be reduced. So that's more powerful than just squeezing the margin, because the margin is in the end like 10% of the total cost, right? So so combination of the technical levers and commercial levers is the key.
Well, and it's interesting because we started this conversation talking about the last few years. And if we've learned anything, it's that if you simply squeeze your suppliers on margin, either they are going to go out of business, which helps no one, Or in cases of short or uncertain supply, they're probably going to prioritize other customers. And that doesn't help either.
Yes.
So taking this kind of an approach allows everyone to have a more informed conversation. How accurate does a should cost model or does should cost analysis have to be in order to be effective? I mean, we will talk at times about not letting perfect be the enemy of good. Where on that scale of aiming for precision and perfection does a model need to be for procurement to actually put it into use?
That is actually a very important question. So of course, in order to create a precise should cost, it takes a lot of time and a lot of knowledge. But actually, that's of course, again, should cost analysis on your end is just a starting point. And in the end, if suppliers say we cannot disclose our breakdown, or that's your estimation, we don't care about your estimation, right? Then there's no results. So of course, the result is the most important thing. So just should cost analysis is just a tool. So even if you have a clear breakdown, if you do not have a good relationship with the suppliers, that doesn't make any sense or any results. So should cost analysis is kind of a starting point for the conversation and say, hey, this is my rough estimation, right? Probably this could be wrong, but this is a good starting point. So can you show me if there's any mistake of my estimation and so on. So accuracy is actually not that important. More important matters how you leverage that to negotiate with your suppliers or to have suppliers disclose their breakdown of the cost and compare, right? So that's my understanding. So don't stick to too much on the preciseness or accuracy of the should cost analysis.
Now let's actually continue on with this idea of the conversation with the suppliers. So you've built a model, you've done your analytical work, you have what you think is a viable, if not perfect, model of what something should cost. You take it to the supplier. And as you said, I think that's a great approach. Listen, this is the best estimation that I can come up with. This is my best effort breakdown. How willing are suppliers to engage in this kind of conversation? I mean, my experience with suppliers is they're often saying, no, I'm not going to reveal that information to you, right? And there's a little bit of hesitancy, especially in a time where procurement is concerned about those relationships. How open do you typically find suppliers are to this approach?
It's also a very important question. So yes, most of the cases, suppliers, of course, kind of hesitant to reveal their breakdowns because, of course, they think or see should cost analysis as an approach to squeeze the margin, to identify the gap and squeeze the margin. But actually, it's not. So if there's a trust between you and suppliers, and that you will not squeeze our margins or suppliers' margins. You just want to leverage it to reduce the actual cost they are paying for. Suppliers are paying. So, for example, if they show us the material cost, and then if that is like double of our estimation, then that's actually a good thing to know, right? Because you estimate, for example, $1 per kilogram, for example, but their actual cost is $2 per kilogram. Then there might be a difference between your assumption and their assumption on the volume per year, for example. So if you have more volume, then the unit cost per kilo weight will be reduced, of course. So then one approach you could take is to leverage your volume rather than local suppliers, small volume, and aggregate all the orders of the materials, and then provide that material to the suppliers on behalf of suppliers. Then, of course, suppliers can reduce the material cost, but that's just the cost for them as well. So it's a kind of win-win situation, right?
Absolutely.
So how to generalize, win-win situation is the key to have a collaborative discussion.
Yeah. Now we've talked about certainly material costs. There's going to be labor costs. There's going to be transportation costs. There might be, machining expenses. Is there a difference in how suppliers feel talking about, as you had said, these things that are costs to them also? And if everybody can find a way together to reduce them, it's a win-win situation, versus how they feel once you get down to the part of the model where you're talking about their profit margin and overhead. Is there a difference in tone around the discussion of the costs that they're incurring versus their overhead or other indications of efficiency, and what type of a profit margin they're trying to take?
Yes, so of course, profit margin is the hardest part, I would say. But actually, at the end of the day, what they want to have is not. So it depends on the suppliers. So you should ask, but profit margin or ratio doesn't really matter. The amount of profits is most important generally for suppliers. So if you can increase, for example, the order to the supplier, then even if the ratio is 1% lower, the total amount of profits from supplier's point of view is higher, right? So even for profit margin, you should generally speaking, right? It depends on the suppliers, but you should disclose your estimated profit margin. For example, is the average of the industry, like 10% EBIT operating profit. And if they take 50%, you cannot say it's too high because it's a strategy for them. But at least overheads, you can reduce that, not by cutting, of course, laying off people, but by increasing the order again. It's a fixed cost, so it totally depends on the revenue or the amount of order you are giving to the supplier, you're sending to the supplier. So even for fixed costs like labor costs, overheads, there's some way to reduce the cost, at least not the cost, but ratio per product, right? So it's better to have that kind of conversation, that kind of serious conversation with the suppliers. And there's a way to create a win-win situation, even for those kind of components.
Yeah. Now, we talked about when doing this analysis for an individual product, we talked about focusing on the core. What are the things that are predominantly driving the cost of this item? But assuming you're a manufacturer that's making multiple products, how do you look across your offering and decide if you're going to start by building maybe one or two models or doing two analysis in parallel just to get yourself started? How do you decide which are the best early things to attempt to do this analysis on?
So again, that's very important. So it takes a lot of times. You should select best components. So generally speaking, again, you should focus on 20% or I say 10% of the total parts you're dealing with, especially in high mix low volume industry. Probably in mass production, you should do it you should apply it to all the parts, and then probably you will go to the supply side and check the actual production per part, right? That's kind of Toyota way, right?
Yeah.
But actually, in high mix low volume industry, you cannot do that because of the number of parts. So you should focus on the core parts, but it takes a lot of time, and it's really difficult for you to start from core part because it should be very complex, or it should be again assemblies.
Yeah.
So just to practice, you can start from like this kind of outlet or simpler parts with like $10 cost or $20 cost. For example, simple metal parts with just cutting and bending without welding, for example. Then you can easily identify the cost, material cost per part, and also cutting and bending, and that's it. So in order to get used to should cost analysis, I recommend you conduct that or apply that to simpler parts. But if you get used to it, you should focus on the core of your parts.
Now, you and your team have resources where you talk about the difference between does cost, should cost, and could cost.
Yes.
What are the differences between those three categories of cost analysis?
So that cost is not actually an analysis, but that's the actual cost breakdown that suppliers at suppliers. So you should focus on should cost first. Should cost is the cost breakdown that you estimate, but actually, generally speaking, in optimal process. So you will not change any of the inputs like machine cost or materials and so on. Or I would say basic inputs, you should not change basic inputs, but you can optimize the processes with the same machinery, same materials, same drawing, right? And that cost is, again, the actual cost breakdown at supplier side. So it's generally higher than should cost. And could cost is the kind of ideal cost in the long term. So in the long term, you can change machineries, right, at supplier side. You can probably more automate the process to create the parts, or you could change some designs on the drawings, change materials to cheaper materials. So could cost is the ideal price breakdown or cost breakdown. Should cost is the current your estimation of the breakdown of the cost, but actually in an optimal process. And that cost is the actual cost breakdown as supplier side.
Now, we've talked a number of times, as much as our focus is on data and analysis and cost and quality metrics, we've also talked a number of times about these relationships. And I would think if you went through the process of doing a should cost analysis and you identify a supplier that is eager to make themselves more efficient, that is hungry for the data and wants to be an active participant in the analysis, you've identified a prime candidate to then go further and work on that could cost, sort of an innovative, collaborative process. What are some of the opportunities? And I'm thinking specifically around certainly the business benefits, but the collaborative opportunity to start imagining together all of the different ways this manufacturing process and the input costs can be improved. What's sort of the, I don't know, blue skies way of thinking about this should cost and what it means for relationships between procurement and suppliers?
So yes, so again, trust between you and suppliers is very important. Probably that's more important than doing should cost analysis precisely. So again, so first of all, of course, suppliers do not they don't want to change their machineries, or they don't want to invest in machineries heavily for you, right? So but actually, for example, in our case, we talk with suppliers and we generally set a target, long-term target. For example, in 3 years, this is the amount of products or volume we want to order you. But of course, there's the utilization of your factory, and 30% is available, but this is not enough to account for this or this amount. For example, $2 million per month, for example. So you need to bridge 3 years goal and the current situation, right, together with suppliers. And if they're really aggressive, they by themselves they invest in machineries or labors. They increase number of people at the factory. But of course, some people at supplier sides are hesitant. So then we show them the actual forecast, and sometimes we commit or book in advance. So this is the 6 months order. And this is our commitment, not just the estimation. Then, of course, they are more willing to invest in basic inputs. that I said, the labors and machineries. So of course, it depends on the commitments. You cannot, so sometimes suppliers feel that the customers deal with us as scapegoats just to do competing biddings, right? Then of course they do not do any effort to reduce the cost or invest, right? So of course you should be more open to your strategy and your forecast, and if you can do that, commitment is very important from customer side.
I think that idea of being open is really important. I even think back, I mean, this isn't new. Gosh, supplier relationship management, was that 15, 20 years, right? Not a new invention. As much as procurement talks about supplier relationship management, oftentimes in execution, what it looked like was, okay, supplier, here are the things that you can go do to make me feel better about our relationship, right? Versus everyone investing in the relationship directly. And so learning what we've learned over the last few years, there also has to be an openness on procurement's part to learn maybe there's something about the design or the requirements that's actually driving costs higher than they actually need to be. And sometimes those things can be hard to hear. In some cases, procurement didn't make the design, right? So we don't necessarily own it. There's going to be conversations within the business. But any advice about how procurement can try to actively listen, be open to new ideas so that we can not only recognize what the supplier might be able to do for us, but also what we might have control over. I guess that's moving from the should to the could, right? How can we keep ourselves open to the potential of improving the efficiency of everything?
So yes, openness is very important. Yeah. So in order to have suppliers open, be open. Of course, you should be open first, right? So you should first disclose your details and again strategies and probably the target price. So we actually start from target price estimated by us, because if you have a good relationship with the suppliers, this is the target, but probably you cannot achieve the target in the first year. But can you come up with the idea how to achieve the target in 2 years or 3 years in the long term, right? Then we can accept higher cost in the first year, but actually in the last year or the third year, if you can achieve this level, then that's okay. So you should be really flexible, not stick to the short-term goal, or probably you should have a KPI of cost reduction for next month, but that's not something interesting from supplier's perspective. So probably thinking about the long-term strategy is the first point, a first step to be open, because if you have a long-term strategy, you don't care about the small details on the short-term matters. So probably that's one advice I can give to the procurement people.
Yeah. Now we'd like to wrap these conversations with action-oriented advice. So I actually want to finish in a way where we started by talking about some of those data points. If I'm one of the 72% of procurement professionals that don't actually know what should cost analysis is and how it works, what advice would you offer me around building a basis of knowledge and maybe starting to have conversations internally?
So one fabulous way is to use ChatGPT. Ask what
interesting.
Is. Actually, I tried that. They answer the detailed steps of should cost analysis. No, half kidding, but yes, actually,
was it a good answer?
Really good starting point.
Okay.
But of course, we can not teach, but tell how it works and what is the general processes. And when we look at the details of the products, probably this product is the good starting point, right? So and also actually we are dealing with the rest 80% of the products that you should not focus on in terms of should cost analysis or other cost cutting approach. So if you are interested in approaching or understanding should cost analysis for the simpler parts, probably we can tell how it works. So you can Google CADDi. But yeah, there are a lot of actually materials available on the internet. ChatGPT is just one example. Yeah. So and also one other thing which is very important is to identify the market data. For example, what is the unique price for steel? What is the unique price for stainless? What is the unique price for aluminum, and so on? There are a lot of data available, and actually, ChatGPT tells us the fair value or fair cost for each of the materials, even though it's 2021 data in 2021. So anyways, there are a lot of data available on the internet. So the important thing is to do it as soon as possible. Take the first step as soon as possible. Right.
Now, the other group I want to ask you about are those roughly 23% of people who know what should cost analysis is and aren't using it. Certainly, I know time is probably a concern for people, maybe getting their skills brushed up. But if you're someone that has maybe done should cost analysis in the past, or at least has some kind of educational or experiential background in it, what advice would you give people around why now is the right time to put this at the top of their tactical priority list, to make this an emphasis internally, to take the knowledge and experience that they have and put it back into practice?
So most of the people overthink about the accuracy of the breakdown, right? So so you don't want to be stupid in front of suppliers.
Yeah.
So that's why you overstick to the accuracy of the breakdown. But again, most important matter is the result in the end, after the collaboration with your suppliers. So should cost analysis is just a starting point. You just have, even if you have a rough idea of material cost and probably process cost and overhead and profit, that these 4 components, that's probably enough to start your conversation. So don't overstick to preciseness of the should cost analysis. Yeah, should cost analysis is just a tool, right?
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Yushiro, I appreciate you taking this time. This has actually been a really interesting conversation. We've done a lot of technical ground covering. We've done a lot of relationship and human understanding in this as well. If people have listened to or watched this conversation and are interested in connecting with you to learn more, where would you recommend we direct them?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Yushiro Kato, and I'm open to connect. And also you can Google CADDi. We provide procurement solutions, procurement platform in the United States. So those are the two ways to connect with us.
Excellent. Well, Yushiro, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for having me.
If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.